have a great meeting. You're live.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the finance meeting of December 4th. So let's get started. Is there any identification of media? I don't see any. Any changes and additions to the agenda? I just have one for scheduling. If there's no more, can I have a mover? Moved by Greg, second by Dale. All in favor? Anybody opposed? See none, carried. There's no delegations. Let's go to number 4, adoption of the general finance minutes. I'll give you a few minutes. And if you're okay with the minutes, can I have a mover? Moved by Amos. Seconder? Second by Elena. All in favor? Anybody opposed? See none, carried. Number 5, we have a presentation from the finance department. Jennifer Court. Good morning.
Hi.
The floor is yours, Jennifer.
Thank you. Is there a presentation that's brought up by me? Or is that...
Teresa, can you bring up her? Okay, so we'll get this will it come up? I'm not sure. No, she's not here. Yep. Okay, so let's get at least started, Jennifer, and then we'll hopefully can figure it out. Okay. Yep, go ahead, Dale. Some copies are going around. Okay, she's gonna still work on it.
Okay.
Thank you. But we have it to follow along.
Okay, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
So good morning. My name is Jennifer Court. I'm the Director of Financial Reporting and Analysis with Six Nations. And I'm here to present the Q2 financial reports. So that's for the period ending September 30th, 2023. So as was just discussed, it was put in your Dropbox, but I understand that there were some issues with that this morning. So I apologize for that. So I hope you all have a hard copy to follow along with, and we're working on getting it put up to the presentation momentarily. So I just wanted to take a moment with it being new council, and it might be the first time that you're seeing this presentation in the format that it's been presented for the past probably about 18 months. You can see in the very left-hand side that it's listed by department, starting at the top with health services, moving down. Some of them are grouped into different areas such as community administration and central administration. Yes, it's this spot. Sorry, I'll show everybody. So it's this one right here. Okay, thank you. In the very left column, you have your budgeted numbers, which were approved by council in March of this year for this fiscal year that started in April. So the very left, that's the revenue, and then in the center is the expenses. The right-hand column of that first section is the approved surplus or deficit for the fiscal year. In the center section, this is not the presentation. Yeah, okay. In the center section, these are the actual results. These are expressed for the period ending September 30th, so at a half-year result. And on the very right, for comparative purposes, is the actual for the full year of fiscal 2023. So as you can see, if we were to take health as the very top line as an example, for the budget for this year, they were budgeted for 46,128,000 revenue, 46,961,000 expenses, which was showing a deficit, budgeted deficit, at the moment that was created at 833,000.
Just hang on a second, Jennifer. We have a question. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Yeah, just.
Can you move your mic down so we can hear you? Thank you.
So I understand how this is done. So using health as the example, you have the revenue for the year that was, or the budget that was approved and their expenditure budget. But it was approved in the red, almost $1 million in the red. Is that normal?
That's not typically normal for health, but that was fully discussed at the budget presentations to the former council when it was being approved. And at that time, it was explained that that's a budgeted number. And if we move on to the actuals, I can explain in a little bit more detail sort of
Yeah.
what's happening.
It's just, I've never, in my experience, had a governing body approve going into the year in the red, like simply not done.
Well, there's a couple of factors at play when this budget was being presented. We have carried surpluses for the last few years. And at some point when you're carrying surpluses, you have to show a deficit in a year to take care of those surpluses moving forward. So we have
You would put
surpluses.
the, if you had the surplus, you would be part of the revenue. You would show that all your revenue to cover your projected expense. You would show that deferred money or your surplus. That would be a revenue coming in, so you wouldn't have that.
From an accounting perspective, if it's recognized in the year prior, because all of the criteria that was met, such as our own source revenue, that's a good example. We earn it in the year that it happens. If we don't utilize it in that year, it carries over as a surplus. Because the revenue was earned a year prior and not earned in the current year shows a deficit. But if you were to look at, say, a 3 or 5 year view, then it would wash out. So you're correct in that over a period of time, there could not be a surplus or a deficit in a government type of, or somebody that holds public sector accounting standards like we do. But because we're looking at a sliver of time, it artificially shows a deficit, but really what it is the surplus that was carried over from the previous year. Okay, I hope that clarifies. Okay, thank you. So in the middle column there, if we're taking health services as the example as well, health services this year so far at September 30th had a revenue of almost $26 million, expenses of also almost $26 million with a surplus of $82,000. So again, just for further clarity, a lot of the times in these departments, that is coming from the fact that we do have own source revenues, such as user fees or that type of thing, that we utilize the funding that we receive from the government first. And then we carry some of our own source revenues because we have a lot more flexibility on how we can utilize those dollars. So they're a lot more specified. So if we have expenses that are covered under our funding agreements, we use the funding for it. And then there's obviously some things that there's little holes in the funding, which we'll talk to in greater detail when we talk at the finance orientation, that we hold on to be able to cover some of the other expenses that maybe falls in between the funding agreements that we have. And in fiscal year 23, you'll see that health is showing a deficit of $190,000. And some of that had to do with us still going into some funding agreements that hadn't been finalized at that moment. And also just as I had spoken about a few minutes ago, there was carry forward surpluses that had been utilized towards those expenses.
Yep, go ahead, Dale.
So in particular to health, I know they usually be, especially with the funding agencies, it would be year to year, the budget out to zero. So is there multi-year agreements that would allow them to carry forward?
Yes, so through their FNIB agreement, there's some multi-year agreements that would allow them to carry forward. But a lot of the provincial agreements, which is probably about 50% of health right now, you're correct in that it's one by one. So if there's a surplus at the end of the year, then that gets eliminated. If there's a deficit, then we have to find another way to cover that.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm not sure, in the interest of time, if you want me to go through the entire list that is being presented up on the screen now, but we can go through a couple of the highlights. So obviously in the red, it pops right off the page. You can see where we are carrying some deficits in this fiscal year, but comparative to the budget, for the most part, most things are in line with what we would expect to see at the half year. So it's not a perfect science because we don't have a perfect year in that everything that happens in the first half happens exactly the same as the second half. But there are a number of things such as, say, rents that would happen in a linear fashion throughout the year. So when I take the look here and I see that right now we're operating at the bottom line total before OFNLP and Brantford Casino, about 3/4 down the page, we're sitting at a $2 million deficit so far in September with an approved deficit of $11 million. And again, the $11 million deficit was a projection at the time. We didn't anticipate that it would fully end up being to that 11 million, but it was the best information we had at the time creating the budget. And we were intending on monitoring it. So now that we're sitting at the 2 million, and if we were to extrapolate that and multiply it by 2, we look like we'd be sitting at about a 4 million. Now, if you've had the opportunity to review our audited financial statements from last year, you'll see that we were in a $14 million surplus. So from a financial professional judgment, I don't see any cause for concern at the current level of where things are sitting. And then, of course, below that, because we like to separate out the casino funds from our operations, the casino funds are sitting at a $5.9 million surplus, which is bringing us to a net surplus of $3.7 million at half year.
Yep, go ahead, Dale.
On public works there. So just to understand the format here, so all these quarterly presentations are done by you now? They're not done within the director's departments or?
At the present time, that's correct, yes.
Okay. So with public works, they're showing or projected 2.8. Now, is that capital projects included in that, or is it all just operational?
There's capital projects included in that as well. I don't know the numbers right offhand at this moment, but it's something that if you're interested, I can provide further details on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Cynthia, then Nathan.
This is more a general question. I see at the bottom there, you've got, like to reconcile, you've got before the OFNLP and Brantford Casino, you have an amount, and then from those, are they in reserves, or how are they held? The Brantford Casino and OFNLP money.
I'm sorry, you're looking at the second document that was sent?
I'm looking at the very first page, at the bottom. Where you said before OFNLP and Brantford Casino.
Yes.
Yeah, those monies, where are they held?
In here?
No, here, like here.
Oh, here? Yes. So
I see it,
Mhm.
but when I took a quick look at the audit, so I'm thinking what you should have for council, because I don't really understand where we were at financially, because when you look at it straight away, it shows a surplus of like a 190 million. So that needs to be broken down. Like, what is that? For example, if we've got, and it says so much go into reserves, what are those reserves? It would be nice if you prepare us a chart. So you have all those monies that total this. and exactly say what is in there. Like, do we have OFNLP monies? And so at the start of the year, what did we have? If we're projecting, a budget is only a projection. Remember you explained we've got all these other little monies and we can't, for whatever reason, stick it in here now, but we really got it. Well, I don't know if we really got it. That's why we need this chart to show all said monies. And at the beginning of the fiscal, what was the balance? And when we use those little monies during the course of the year, and then over here, so we have all these money pots, then over here, all these departments. So we'd say at the beginning of the year, this is what we had. We're allocating, what are we here? Health, 833 million or 833,000. So you would say on here, here's all the departments and we know where the money's going, and at the end of the year, when we're doing our budgeting, we are knowing where those sources are, because we have to have a handle on it. And I don't begin to have a handle on it right now. I've went over the audit and everything.
I think that when I go to the balance sheet, that maybe that'll provide a little bit more clarity. And then from that, we can have further discussions for sure about things that you would like to see a little bit in more details.
If we've got all,
They can't hear you. Your mic's not on.
no, we need to have a handle on our monies. And we'll go through here, and I'm good. It's good to have you explain how we're not really in this deficit, like approving these big deficits. But if we're not, you said we've got these other, for example, health, they had a surplus, but we can't count it this year, right? Well, if we've got all these pots of money in this chart up here, if you can identify all those pots, and then on this side have the departments, and what at the beginning, when these budgets were approved, you projected you were going to take this out of here and this out of there. So then we'll have a better handle on our situation.
I have Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, we've gone through this quite a bit, as you know. In the consolidated statement that you provided, I think everybody has it. There is an accumulated surplus sheet there that specifically says we're sitting at cash at around 31 million, and then we have a reserve funds, which are actually good. I always believe that our reserve should be at least 1/3 the value of our company. So, and we're right on that, I think around $80 million is in reserve compared to like 245, which we're worth. And it's always good. I always believed in, having my own business, especially off the res, heavily taxed, that that a reserve fund should be at least 1/3 the value of my company in order to foresee any problems. One of the other sheets that you did provide was the variances. As you see, the variances here for all the departments. So the variances there, and it just happened this year, is that because of the budgeted amount, and of course costs have changed, especially during COVID, that usually the costs have gone up in this past year. So and what you budgeted for, the thing is that a lot of the either we have float money that flows through, and the other thing is, of course, we have a good surplus as well, right, to cover those variances. And for example, we were down about 2.5 million in the recreation part, and we were able to cover that. So I thought, just having that good, I would say, fiscal responsibility has really helped us in terms of getting our funding, getting loans, and of course our investments did very well. So yeah, and I think as we move through it, we'll see that come about, and that's sort of the reason why we really went ahead and approved this, was because of the positive outlook, even though there were some variances throughout all the departments, that we knew that there would be a positive outlook coming forward.
Yes, thank you, Greg. And that was, thank you for bringing that up as well, because I know that there were issues with the Dropbox. Cynthia, I think one thing that might help, and also for the rest of council, is I did include a quarterly report. And it's about 4 pages long, but it does go through all of the narrative to let you know what in words as opposed to in numbers, sort of what is contained within each of these areas. So if we could actually, if everybody is okay with that, if we could move on to the statement of financial position, because I think that that's where, which is the next page here, I think that's where some of the questions about where is the money and things like that would be answered. So on this page here, which is also being displayed up on the screen, this is our statement of financial position, which is what the balance sheet is called under public sector accounting standards. So depending on what you're familiar with, you might call it a balance sheet, but with public sector accounting standards, we call it a statement of financial position. And this is expressed at the moment of time of September 30th, 2023. In the second column, it compares to the previous year at the same point in time of September 30th, 2022. And then the last columns are variance in dollars and then variance in percentage for each of the categories. So you can see that at September 30th, we held cash of $76 million, which was down from the $98 million from the year prior. And then in the variance analysis, there is some explanation as to why, but just as a refresher. So it's down in cash specifically. However, if you were to look at total current assets, you would see that overall they have increased from $202 million to 241. So the difference in cash is a combination of a couple of things, but also you'll see that there's a growth in investment from 60 million to 129. So as we hold cash from some of the funding agreements that we get before we have utilized them out, what we have been doing is investing into short-term GICs, very short-term. I think they're 6 months. 6 months up to a year. And we monitor the cash that we are going to require over the next 6 months to a year and bring those in and out of investments because those investments do yield a higher rate than our bank interest does. So that is one aspect where we are proactively trying to utilize the assets that we have to generate more assets, which again leads into some of this funds that we would have available that can be used at our discretion as opposed to being restricted by what our funders allow us to do.
Thank you for that.
Other questions?
Thank you for that.
Cynthia?
Yeah, this is getting nearer to what I'm talking about, but not quite. For example, current assets, we have cash of 76,540,000 and investments of, what is it, 129. So I mean, if we had said chart, cash, from where did this cash come?
The source of the cash?
Yeah.
That primarily came from funding agreements, but it would also come from our own source revenue when we charge for services.
Okay, now if it came from funding agreements, normally there's terms and conditions on these funding agreements. You can't just put it all in one pot.
Yes, I agree.
And I know that they're very, very stringent. And if you cannot show, and you got to report on, they usually measure it by units. So how do we know? That's what I mean. This should be broken down, this cash. So if we had a surplus from, well, we wouldn't never have a surplus from Public Works, but just say we did. And in the terms and conditions of the agreement, we had to use it on whatever the heck we had to use it on. Health is pretty particular. General welfare is particular. Those sort of things. That's what I mean. This cash needs to be broken down so we know from where did it come. So it will total this 75 million. And the investments, we can have that broken down. What investments? So we know during the course of the year is we need to forecast. We need to do 5-10-year forecasts of what we need, what our plans are, because if we don't have a handle on that, we can't do long-term planning. Sir, down a little further, because you've got the short term. I assume these are short-term investments, and then further down you have the long-term investments, which are considerably smaller, but so you get the idea of what I'm talking about now when we need the breakdown so we understand what's going on.
I do understand what you're saying. While you're speaking, I'm thinking of the complexity of how many accounts we have, and how frequently things come in and out, and trying to maintain something as substantial as what it sounds like you're speaking of. But again, we can take this a step further. I can work with Nathan, to see,
Yeah,
know,
I
I
don't
have
know how we
Cyn-
can't be doing that.
Cynthia,
Sorry.
follow up?
Yeah.
And then Nathan.
I don't know how we can't be doing that because we have all these departments, we have directors of these departments. They're responsible for their budgets, their expenses. And if they're going to do, they also have to do planning. They have to plan. Usually we require 5-10 year plans. So they need to know where they sit, exactly where they sit, or they can't plan. We can't plan. That's all.
I fully agree with you. And this is a very bird's eye level of view of what is going on. There are additional things that we review at the department level. And even when we do the financial review with Nathan or the CEO, we also have further deeper dives into the information. Everything that you're speaking of, it's not that it's not being tracked, and it's not that the departments are not aware. It's just not expressed in the holistic here. We're trying not to overwhelm the community because this is also for the community, and also for yourselves. This is a snapshot of how overall we are doing. Those deeper dives do happen. They're not being presented at this time.
I have, oh,
I don't want to overwhelm anybody either, but if we're going to do our job, we need to know this. We don't know this right now. And I know it can be done and it's not that complicated because we've always done it.
Nathan?
Yeah, I think a lot of this will come out in the orientation as well, in terms of how we as an organization have to get a handle on what you're saying in terms of the vastness. But you dropped the number, and I'm getting updated as you guys are, but you dropped the number of how many agreements on Friday. Can you share with them how many? Because that's the complexity, right? We got a lot of agreements coming in terms of that in and out, and looking at it from that lens. It will get kind of overwhelming when you hear the number of agreements you have. So if you can just share with them how many agreements we have at this current time.
We have in excess of 400 agreements that we track on a regular basis. And depending on the complexity of those, so some of those could be small agreements, but some of them are very large and complex agreements as well.
Hazel?
With that many agreements, is there no way the funders say, can amalgamate some of those things into one concise agreement rather than, this is like a jigsaw puzzle. And they're making it difficult for everyone by having all of those small little pieces, when I'm sure they have a way that they could make it more concise. Actually, for this organization and for you as a finance people.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly that would be nice and it would be ideal. I know that when I am speaking with funders, because we have reporting that needs to go into them and things like that, and depending on the agreement, depends on how granular the information needs to go back to them. And I've been asking for the same, like, are there things that can be put in together, or can we streamline these types of things? But it's something that I know as a finance person, I would love to see a lot less, so that we can continue to look forward and be more impactful in things like forecasting and whatnot, as opposed to looking backwards to see what happened 6 months ago or a year ago.
Yep, go ahead, Hazel.
So as a follow-up to that, is this organization, this council, able to assist in any way with those funders to try and reach that point where it's more condensed and it's not so, that sounds ridiculous to have that many agreements. And you have to report on each one. Oh, that must take
And some of them are even quarterly reports or bi-yearly report, like 6-month reports and then a year report. I know that there are discussions that have been occurring about other things such as the 10-year agreement and things like that, which I know from a reporting standpoint, that greatly reduces the amount of reporting that's required. However, that needs to be something that we know the pros and cons of before we move forward into, but there are other things that we could take a look at for sure. I know that from the provincial agreements especially, those are very heavy on the reporting, interim reporting. They're also very delayed in giving us final information. And they're also, for the most part, 1 year at a time. So when you factor all of those things all in together, it does add a lot of complexities, and takes away a lot of our time to be able to be doing other things because there's so much focus on just reporting the things as opposed to, reporting, I guess, more having the conversations about strategy. It's trying to make that balance between being able, like I said, to look forward and look backwards, and also be able to have up-to-date information as well.
I have Nathan, then Dale.
Yeah, and that's something too we want to look at in terms of that piece going forward. One is the work around the 10-year agreements, because there are pros and cons to looking at that from a federal perspective. I know communities that have gone forward. If we wanted to kind of explore it more, Equisasne is one that has gone forward and is involved in that 10-year agreement. And we can look at the, those pros and cons, but that's in a lot of ways, that's the political call. And when you look at the provincial piece, this is where in my view, this is where it gets absolutely messy. And if we can get some work, and I think, that if I remember correctly, when I was at the regional level, resolutions came in yearly about, provincial reporting, provincial funding, and streamlining the process. So that's kind of that broader kind of political piece we need going forward, is that provincial piece. Because that's where you get, agreements coming in and you got to report on something for 30K and you got this massive report to do. You got another one in for 50K, you got another one in for 70K. That's where you get the numbers rise in terms of those contribution agreements. So I think some work has to be done on that front. But like I said, when it comes to regional priorities, funding agreements always gets put down to the final burner when you look at that collective piece, because I can't see the province, and I'm just being honest, I can't see the province kind of going forward and doing it in a one-off kind of scenario. It has to be the collective in terms of working with the collective in Ontario to make those fundamental changes, because I'm sure they're just as overburdened on the provincial side having to manage all of these agreements going forward. So I think when we kind of get down into the nitty-gritty, that's the political piece that we need to kind of work together on going forward.
I have Dale, then Cynthia, then Amos.
Just a question in regards to on your current assets there, and I know this goes back to the funding agreements, and maybe they've changed over the years, is in relation to when the funding agreement comes and the allocation comes. Have they changed their guidelines to say that you're allowed to do investments? Let's say they fund you, let's say your budget's $10 million and they give you $8 million, and quarterly, you ain't gonna use all that. So the difference in the allocation, and they allow you to do the investments now, is, and I'm assuming that's how your investments have grown.
From a historical standpoint, I've been here for 2 years, so I just want to invite Wayne to help with the history.
So a lot of the investments does relate to the federal funding, the ISC. So within that agreement, as you may recall, Dale, there was some restrictions, but no longer are there any restrictions with regards to investment income on it, or those funds having to be returned in that event. Yeah.
You got a follow-up? Dale?
Yeah, just another question in regards to your fixed assets. Now, just looking at your summary sheet here, it doesn't really say how the assets grew. It doesn't specify. I don't know if that can be done in the future because you said you grew by fixed assets was almost like $11 million. So just what are those that grew by 11 million?
Thank you for the feedback.
Cynthia?
What type of federal agreement are we in right now with this?
We're in a 5-year agreement.
Amos?
Yeah, that's good follow-up to Cynthia. I was at a think tank in October in Toronto, Ottawa. And there's representatives there from Treasury Board. And I wasn't on band council at the time, so I just listened. They said of the 644 plus First Nation communities, a third of them are on the 10-year agreement. A third of them aren't getting there, and a third of them need a lot of help. So we're in a 5-year rather than a 10-year, right? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so to get to the 10-year, do we got be like an ISO level?
Yeah, there's definitely different things such as implementing an audit committee and things like that that need to happen for you to go to the 10-year that we do not have in place right now.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that's not necessarily what has been preventing us from moving to that at the moment. I know it's been something that's been discussed in the last 2.5 years that I've been here. But I think it was having more of a knowledge of the impacts and the pros and cons prior to making that decision, because as Nathan expressed, it is more of a political decision as opposed to, say, myself and Wayne making that decision.
Okay, just the last comment. The person from Treasury Board said, I asked a question like, do the provinces have a lot of strings when you're transferring money to the provinces? And she said no. Generally, there are not the strings attached to the province when they transfer to the province. She might have been just trying to appease me, but I kind of like the idea that when they federally transfer money to the province for their use, there's no strings attached because they've done all the planning up front of how they're going to use the money. So I just hope we can get to that level when we get to the 10-year agreements. It's just without strings, right? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So moving on to the statement of financial position, obviously, as I had expressed, our current assets have gone up, and as well has our total assets. For criteria, what is included that in each of those categories on the statement of financial position, as I said, the variance analysis that was provided, it would be very useful in giving you a baseline of understanding what is included in those areas. And again, your feedback is appreciated on what you want to see more of, or even deeper of, for future presentations. Moving on to our liabilities, I want to bring your attention really to the deferred revenue prior year, and unearned revenue. So when we talk about the funding agreements that are coming in, and it being the cash, obviously the cash comes in on the one side, and then as a balance sheet, you need to have, or even it's double entry accounting, so you need to have a complementary other side, and the other side to that a lot of the time is your unearned and your deferred. So it sits as a liability because as we have brought up in this presentation, there is criteria that needs to happen before it is fully ours. So when something is ours, we can list it as an asset. So in the moment, the cash is ours, but there is also a corresponding liability. So a corresponding obligation by Six Nations on that money. So that's where you can see them in both of those places. And that is things like the funding criterias, and are we following those things before we take it out of the deferred revenue? And when it comes out of the deferred revenue, it stays in our cash, assuming we haven't spent it yet. And then it transfers onto that first sheet, the statement of operations, into a recognized revenue. So right now they're sitting $85 million in deferred revenue. So that would be revenue that's within, or deferred revenue or cash that has been received within this 5-year agreement. The prior year is because during COVID on our former 5-year agreement, there was issues with being able to say staff appropriate, like the number of people that we needed. So the staffing money might not have been spent. Those types of scenarios happened. When the 5-year agreement was expiring, we asked for a carry forward, and we were granted the ability to do that. Another year passed, COVID effects were still prohibiting some of those things. We asked for a secondary extension for spending that money, and we were granted that as well. So the deferred revenue prior year that has to be spent by March 31st, 2024. But the deferred revenue that's sitting in the one that does not have prior year, that would have things into the rest of the 5-year agreement. Okay, so there's a little bit more time to be able to spend those funds. And then the unearned revenue is funds that we received this year to be spent on the programming and operations of the organization.
I have a question, Dale?
So on that deferred revenue, how is that operational wise when all the money hasn't coming in, we got expenses? Like for your deferred revenue, you said it hasn't come in yet, so operational wise, is it impacting that side?
No, I'm sorry, it hasn't been spent yet. It has come in. That's why it's sitting in the
Okay.
deferred revenue. Yeah, and in the cash, but it hasn't been spent yet. So we still have the liability of spending it appropriately as per our funding agreements before we can take it out of the deferred revenue. So from a cash standpoint, we're very healthy on the cash that we have. So there are times, I think, as what you're saying, for instance, in some of our provincial funding, we haven't had complete transparency on what is going to be given to us. They do send, for the most part, monthly installments. It's just we don't know the final number until later in the year. And that can have an impact, not necessarily on us halting operations, but more so on us looking at if we did have an overspend because they adjusted it negatively for our needs, then we would have to find from our other, maybe our investment income or from surpluses that we had carried forward, or our own source income or that type of thing to cover those shortfalls. Does that explain what you were asking?
Or like Peter Paul, taking from Peter and paying Paul, is that what you're getting at?
Yes, but not, but not as sinister. I would also note that there's a new item under long-term liabilities called the asset retirement obligation. That was a new accounting standard that was implemented in last fiscal year. So that is also being presented in this year's results. And then finally, under your net assets, which really, if we were looking at something that was following maybe IFRS or ASPE regulations, it would be called retained earnings. That's where you have your reserves, things that have been transferred into your reserves. So it's showing us $83 million. And that includes both committed reserves and uncommitted reserves. And then the retained earnings and the profit and loss for the period to balance out your statement of financial position.
Dale?
On that retirement obligation, is there a set percentage that they go by?
Wayne had a lot of interaction with the auditors to implement this standard during the audit.
Yeah, so it was, as Jennifer had mentioned, it was a new accounting standard that came into effect last year. So it was an analysis of all of our physical assets and the cost that it was gonna, that we were gonna incur when the time came that we had to retire or take out of service those assets. So if there was any asbestos removal that was going to be done, that had to be accounted for. And that was done through, there was a costing model that we utilized that the province had approved and had utilized for their purposes as well. So that was the costing model that we used based on our estimated units. square footage, etc.
So that's just on the books, they're retired, but they're still assets or items.
They're still in service, yes.
Cynthia?
Yeah, this has been an issue for First Nations. Those things you have to deem assets are really liabilities. But it's the accounting that you have to do. We have to count it as what is really a liability. We have to count as an asset. For example, any of our buildings here, no one could buy it except if you were a First Nations person. So it's just anytime you get a capital asset, it costs you huge because you have the O&M, but it's never an asset. Just
Yes, because who are you going to sell it to, right?
Yeah.
So an asset is an asset as long as there's a value of it that you can sell, but from accounting standards, yes, it's listed as an asset.
Cynthia?
if I could just follow up with that, but that's what I meant about trying to get a handle on where are we? Because when you look at the audit, we've got like 190 million. That's what I mean. We need to understand it, a breakdown. So much is how much is assets. So we know, well, okay, we have that asset, but it's not something we can use for, say, to put into housing or whatever, water.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, so basically, so I had presented the statement of operations, also known as an income statement, and then also the statement of financial position, also known as your balance sheet, in other accounting standards. And then there's a complementary variance analysis to go through some of the details. This is a new document that in our last general finance, there was a question asked if we could have an analysis included in that. So that's my first go at what I have prepared to present to council. And again, if there's any further questions or feedback, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions. I know some of the councillors have stopped by a few times to sort of ask, what is it that you're talking about? Because for some people, it's new looking at financial statements, and I totally appreciate that and understand that you do need to have an understanding and a comfortability around the information that's presented. So at any given time, please feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Is there any other questions or comments? If not, can I have a mover to accept his information? Elena? Second by Amos. All in favor? Be opposed? Seen none, carried. Thank you. We'll go to number 6 regarding the email poll. That was moved by Dale and second by Cynthia Jamieson, that the Six Nations of the Grand River elected council approves to support Paul Robertson's proposal to OPG Regional Biodiversity Grant via Ontario Woodlots Association for a 3-year project period on Six Nations woodlots. So I have a mover. It was already moved. Is there questions?
Yeah, question.
Go ahead.
Dale, you mentioned that Mr. Robertson would be in touch with the environmental department. Has that taken place?
I don't think it has, because I know they're just submitting the proposal and he probably won't hear back for a few months to see whether it even gets approved or not. So when it does, then he said he can do follow-up conversations with whoever, whether it's Rob or I forget the girl's name in the forestry department, which is probably where it should be anyways.
I feel like it shouldn't wait until it's approved. If it's coming down the pipe, maybe they should be coordinating. And my concern with this was that he hasn't spoken with any of these people. So we don't know if there's overlapping work being done or if they have plans that this might interfere with. So I was just hoping that they could communicate with one another before things are underway.
No, I can ask him to do that, but he figured early in 24 before he gets actual authorization to see whether we even get the money, but he can have communication with them to set up a plan, I guess, in regards to what's what and who's doing what.
Yep, go ahead, Greg.
My question was too, is, I think this fellow gave a presentation earlier in the year, I believe. And he gave it for information. So I don't know if this was a project or not, but we did look at it. There was no decision process in it. My question is that this was sort of a kind of a last minute, I guess, proposal. My question is that did we consider it as council an emergency VCR that had to be done? Well, my question is why did he wait, knowing the deadline, and then it throws it back on us? It's our emergency, you know what I mean? And it's his negligence in terms of getting it in on time, his proposal on time. The other thing too is that to Elena's point that I just needed a little bit more background on like this fellow's not doing it for free, right? His budget was around 49,000, something like that. So I just didn't know, you know, what his take was on this. If he's applying for grant money, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure he's going to get some type of remuneration for doing this here on the territory. But, you know, those are just sort of questions that I had that, did we classify this as an emergency type of decision that we had to make? And that why it was kind of like he left it, you know, so that was just my question.
I did ask him why he was so late, and he said he's very busy with his Woodlot Association. And I know he's working on 2 other proposals as well, and I guess they're all under the same boat of meeting that deadline. And I think that was more the crisis was just getting support to submit the proposal. That was due, I think it was last Thursday. So that was the urgency, was just getting it submitted. Whether it gets approved or not was going to be another issue once it gets submitted. So, but that was, I guess, to answer your question, Greg, was to just the deadline he had. And yeah, he left it till late. He did apologize, but he will be giving us the full blown proposal once it's done. And if there's further questions, we can send them on to him and see what he needs to do, you know, to get the project rolling if it gets approved.
Amos and Cynthia.
I was just wondering, when you go into these partnerships, it's like, should we have a moratorium date? Like it has to be 6 months out before you come to this council to get an agreement. Maybe that's what we need to put in place, is like there has to be a moratorium. You can't just come in every 3 months and try to get a grant partnership. Maybe that's what we start practicing, is having even a year would be nice, but 6 months is good. But then it would give us time for us to assign one of our departments to work with these potential partners. Just a thought.
That's great. Cynthia?
Yeah, I did read in that email chain that there wouldn't, the is it OPG? Wouldn't be making a decision until the new year, so it left time to revise the budget or the work plan. But for the point made by Helena and Greg, it's always good. The left needs to know what the right's doing, so it would give him time to meet up with our own forestry folk or whomever, because I see it was that Ontario Woodlot Association would take the administrative burden out of it. But in that work plan, it said, but they would, you know, when they go out and do their surveying or whatever they do with this new implanting, it would be like they would use college kids and whoever, but they would need some, it said, a little assistance from our folks. So yeah, you know, when somebody is planning for you, it's nice to know ahead of time what the plan is, or for them to have further input into that the work plan and the budget for that matter.
Yep, Amos.
As an association, are we a member of it, or do we have a relationship with the Woodlot Association? Do we have a history with them?
I don't think so. You can answer that, Dale?
Yeah, I mean, that association is his association, and he does these things for different communities. So we're not part of that association. Is that he would be doing the work. We would end up with a report and a plan of action, I guess, as it relates to our forestry program here on Six Nations. But if there's any other questions, like I can forward them to Mr. Robinson.
Okay, so it did, was an email poll. It did pass. I just need to waive second reading. Is there a mover? Dale, seconder? Cynthia, all in favor? Anybody opposed? See none, carried. I had one for scheduling. It's for this Friday, December 8th. It's at the Brantford Armory for cadet event at 7 o'clock. Can I have a mover? To be able to attend. That's for myself. Moved by Hazel, second by Greg, all in favor? Anybody opposed? See none, carried. Okay, that's it for the open. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Dale,
Yeah, motion to go in camera.
second by Amos. All in favor? Anybody opposed? See none, carried. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.